The summer sun had turned the earth into a bed of cracked bone. Every inch of Clara May's land was brittle and pale, a wasteland of dust that once used to breathe with wheat and wildflowers. The well, her one lifeline, had run dry weeks ago. She tied a rope to an old bucket and dropped it again that morning, praying for the splash of water at the bottom, but there had been only the hollow echo of emptiness. Inside the small, sagging farmhouse, the air was heavy with heat and milk-sour scent. Her twin babies lay wrapped in thin, faded blankets, their cheeks flushed and lips dry from thirst. Clara rocked them gently, though she had nothing left to feed them. Her own body had stopped giving days ago. Her husband's coat, hung still by the door, was the only thing left of him since the fever took him last winter. She'd buried him under the oak by the ridge, the one place that still had a hint of green. Clara was 22, but her reflection in the window looked much older. The dust had settled into the lines of her face, and her once bright hair now clung limp to her temples. She whispered softly to her babies, half lullaby, half prayer, telling them about rain that would come, about grass that would grow again, about how she'd keep them safe no matter what. But the truth pressed harder each day. She couldn't. The nearest town, Dry Creek, was 15 miles away, too far for a woman alone with 2 hungry infants and a horse that limped more than it trotted. Still, she'd made the trip before, trading quilts and jars of pickled beans for sugar or soap. But this time there was nothing left to trade. The pantry was bare, and the few coins she had wouldn't buy enough to fill even one bottle for the babies. That morning, when the wind carried the distant sound of the church bell from town, Clara felt something inside her snap, a quiet surrender. She set her jaw, wrapped the babies tight in her shawl, and stepped outside. The sky was white with heat, the horizon shimmering like melted glass. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears as she walked toward the barn. Her old cow, Bess, stood there still, a bag of bones with kind eyes, the only creature left that hadn't given up on her. "Come on, girl," Clara whispered, slipping the rope around the cow's neck. "We're going to town." She didn't cry. Not yet. There were no tears left in her body anyway. As she hitched the cow to her cart, she glanced back once at the house. The wind pushed the door open, creaking like a goodbye. The place had been her dream once, the start of a life she and her husband had promised to build. Now it was just walls and shadows and silence. The road to town was long, baking under the noon sun. Her dress clung to her, damp with sweat and dust, and the babies whimpered weakly in her arms. Every few steps she whispered to them, words meant to comfort, but really they were meant for herself. "It'll be all right. Mama's gonna fix this. Mama's gonna make it better." But she didn't know how. By the time the rooftops of Dry Creek shimmered into view, the world had narrowed to the sound of her breathing and the scrape of the cartwheel. She headed straight for the auction yard, the only place where anyone might still be buying livestock in a season like this. She told herself she'd sell Bess, maybe get enough money to buy milk and food for the twins. Still, a small, hollow voice whispered at the back of her mind, "And when the money's gone?" "What then, Clara May?" She didn't answer it, because she already knew something had to give before the sun set again. And she feared, deep down, that it might be her. The Dry Creek auction yard buzzed like a hive under the burning sun. Dust swirled in the air, kicked up by boots and hooves, mixing with the low hum of voices, the bellow of cattle, and the clink of coins passing from palm to palm. It was a day of business for most, but for Clara May, it was the day she surrendered the last thing that tied her to home. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her babies swaddled close against her chest, the cow Bess tied to a post beside her. Her dress was plain and faded, her bonnet shading a face drawn thin from worry. No one looked twice at her, just another poor widow trying to survive the drought. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell, a practiced rhythm that carried over the crowd. "Fine stock from the Langford Ranch. 2-year heifer, good for breeding. Who'll start me at 20? Clara waited, heart hammering, until her turn came. She stepped forward, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Sir," she said to the auctioneer, "I have 1 cow to sell." The man glanced at her, then at Bess. He scratched his chin. That old thing? Might fetch something for beef if she don't drop first. A few men laughed. Clara flinched but said nothing. She needed the money too badly to defend her pride. All right, the auctioneer called out. 1 milk cow, seen better days. Who'll start me at $5? Silence. The crowd shifted, restless. Someone muttered, ain't worth the rope she's tied with. Another said, waste of time. Clara's throat tightened. Her babies whimpered softly against her chest. She rocked them, whispering, hush now, hush. And that's when she saw him. He stood near the back of the yard, tall and still, a shadow beneath the wide brim of a black hat. His coat was clean, despite the dust, and the way the men around him gave space told her everything she needed to know. This was a man of means, and a man not easily approached, Wyatt Langford. She'd heard the name whispered in town. The owner of the largest spread this side of the territory. A widower, they said, lost his wife in a riding accident years back. Since then, he'd buried himself in work and kept to himself, colder than the iron branding tools his men used on cattle. Clara didn't mean to stare, but something about the stillness of him drew her eyes. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't bartering. He was just watching, her, the cow, the babies in her arms. When the auctioneer's call went unanswered, Clara's voice cracked as she stepped closer. Please, she said. She still gives milk. She's gentle and kind. She'll keep your barn fed through winter. The man at the podium shrugged. No takers. Sorry, miss. Clara's heart dropped. She felt the heat close around her like a cage. Her babies stirred, one letting out a soft, dry cry. She rocked them faster, but tears began to sting her eyes. The faces in the crowd blurred, men looking away, uncomfortable, unwilling to meet her gaze. And then, slowly, Wyatt stepped forward. His boots made no sound on the packed dirt. He reached into his coat, drew out a few bills, and handed them to the auctioneer. I'll take the cow, he said. His voice was low, steady, commanding without needing to be loud. The auctioneer blinked, surprised but pleased. All right then, sold to Mr. Langford. Clara should have felt relief. Instead, something in her chest broke. The cow was gone, the money wouldn't last, and she had nothing left to trade for tomorrow. She turned away, clutching her children, whispering to them, Mama tried. Mama tried. Wyatt watched her go, watched the way she held those babies like they were her heartbeat itself. Something flickered in his eyes, brief but deep. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but before the sun would set that day, her voice, the soft, broken voice of a mother with nothing left, would stop him in his tracks, and the next thing he'd say would change both their lives forever. The auction yard had emptied, leaving only the wind and the soft creak of the wooden rails. The men were gone, their pockets a little heavier, their eyes already on the next sale. Clara May stood in the dust, her babies asleep in her arms, the folded bills from Bess's sale tucked tightly in her palm. $5. That was all she had bought her, a few days' mercy, maybe a week's. Her throat burned as she turned away from the yard. The sun was sinking low, staining the sky with bruised streaks of purple and gold. She felt the babies stir, hungry again, and her heart cracked at the sound of their soft cries. She'd hoped to buy milk, maybe bread, but when she stepped inside the general store, the clerk only shook his head. Ain't no fresh milk this week, Clara. Wells are dry all across the county. Closest thing I got is tinned condensed, and that's near $1 a can. She stared at the shelf, 3 small cans behind the dusty glass. She had enough for 5 of them. But then what? What would she feed them next week? Clara stepped back into the street, the coins trembling in her hand. The world felt too big, too bright, too cruel. She could hear the distant hum of laughter from the saloon, the creak of wagon wheels, the bark of a dog. All the sounds of life moving on without her. Her legs gave out beside the trough in front of the blacksmith's, and she sank to her knees. The babies whimpered again, their tiny mouths searching for milk that wasn't there. She rocked them, tears falling freely now, mixing with the dust on her cheeks, and then she whispered it, the words that would tear something sacred inside her. Please, take my babies. The words were no louder than a breath, but the sound of them carried soft and strange, into the dying light. She didn't even realize she was speaking at first. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. She looked up, and there he was again, Wyatt Langford. He stood just a few paces away, his hat tilted low, eyes dark with something unreadable. He'd followed her without meaning to. Or maybe he had. He didn't know why he couldn't walk away when the auction ended, why her voice had stayed in his mind like a splinter he couldn't dig out. Now, seeing her there on the ground, clutching those children like they were all that kept her alive, something inside him shifted. Clara tried to stand, her knees shaking. "Please," she said again, voice breaking. "You've got room. You've got food. I seen your ranch from the road. Just take them. I'll walk away. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, slow and careful, like approaching a spooked horse. "You're asking me to take your young ones? And leave you here to die?" Her lips trembled. "I'd rather die than watch them starve." Silence fell between them, heavy as the air before a storm. A wagon rattled by, the sound of boots scuffed behind them. But in that moment, it felt like the whole world had gone still. Wyatt looked down at her, at the hollow eyes of a mother who'd given everything she had, at the trembling hands holding two small lives that had no one else to hold them. His voice came out low, almost rough. "You're part of the deal, ma'am." Clara froze, blinking up at him. What? "I'll take the babies," he said. "But I'm taking you, too. I don't buy people, and I don't take charity. You come as their mother or not at all." For a heartbeat, she couldn't speak. Then her lip quivered, and she nodded slowly, half in disbelief, half in gratitude so fierce it hurt. As Wyatt reached out a hand to help her stand, the sun slipped behind the ridge, leaving them in the quiet glow of dusk, two strangers bound by mercy, not yet knowing that what began as a deal would soon turn into something neither of them could have imagined. The town's dust still clung to Clara May's hem as she followed Wyatt Langford toward his wagon. The babies stirred against her chest, too weak to cry, their breath soft against her collarbone. Wyatt moved with a kind of quiet authority, each step measured, each motion deliberate, as if he'd long ago learned that words weren't needed when action could speak for a man. He loaded her few belongings into the back, an old quilt, a tin cup, and a Bible so worn the cover was almost gone. Clara stood awkwardly by, not knowing whether to thank him or to run. She wasn't sure what he truly meant when he'd said, "You're part of the deal." He climbed up into the wagon and extended a hand. "Come on," he said. "We've got a long ride before dark." Clara hesitated, clutching the babies close. Why are you doing this, Mr. Langford?" Wyatt looked at her, the dying sun catching the hard edges of his face. "Because I've seen enough folks die alone. I ain't gonna add your names to that list." It wasn't kindness in his voice. It was something steadier. Something that came from a place deep in him that didn't know how to say mercy but knew how to act it. She took his hand, her small, calloused fingers brushing against his. His grip was firm, steadying her as she climbed onto the seat beside him. The wagon creaked into motion, rolling westward toward the open plain. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The rhythm of the wheels filled the silence, the slow turn of wood and iron over dirt. The babies slept. Clara held them tightly, her head bowed, too afraid to believe that safety might truly be within reach. When they reached the ridge, the land opened wide before them, a vast stretch of golden grass and distant hills where the horizon seemed to breathe. And there, sitting proud and solitary in the middle of it all, was the Langford Ranch. It was the largest thing she'd ever seen, a two-story house with a wraparound porch, white fences, barns, and windmills spinning in the dusk wind. Cattle grazed in the far pastures like dark dots against the fading light. Clara's breath caught. "You live here all alone?" Wyatt nodded once. "Used to be two of us. Not anymore." Something passed over his face then, something raw, fleeting, and quickly buried. She didn't ask. She could tell by the way he looked at the empty rocking chair on the porch that there were ghosts he wasn't ready to name. When the wagon rolled to a stop, Wyatt called out, and two ranch hands came striding over. Both men tipped their hats, but looked at Clara with confusion. One of them, a tall, grizzled man named Boone, scratched his beard. "Boss, who's this?" Wyatt didn't blink. "She's staying. Get a room ready in the East Wing. For her and the little ones." Boone's eyebrows rose, but he said nothing more, only nodded and walked off. Clara felt every eye on her as she stepped down, the weight of judgment pressing heavy on her shoulders. She wanted to speak, to explain that she hadn't come here out of pride or greed, but the words wouldn't form. Wyatt saw it, the way she shrank under their gaze. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "They'll learn soon enough." He led her up the porch steps and pushed open the front door. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old wood, the air cool and still. A grandfather clock ticked softly in the hall. On the mantel above the cold hearth stood a framed photograph, a woman in a pale dress, smiling faintly at the camera. Clara's eyes lingered on it, and she understood without asking who she was. Wyatt noticed, his voice going rough at the edges. "That was my wife. Been gone near 3 years now." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. He nodded once, not looking at her. "I don't expect you to fill her place, Mrs. May. I'm just offering you one." Clara swallowed hard, tears burning behind her eyes. "I'm no one, Mr. Langford. Just a woman trying to keep her babies alive." Wyatt turned to her then, his gaze steady, unflinching. "Not anymore, you're not. You're under my roof now. That makes you somebody." And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt something stir in her chest that almost felt like hope. Morning came with a pale gold light spilling through the thin curtains of the East Wing. For the first time in weeks, Clara May woke to the sound of quiet instead of hunger. The baby slept in a small cradle by the bed, real wood, smooth and polished, not the crate she used back home. Their cheeks looked pink again. Alive. She sat up slowly, her muscles sore from years of work and worry. The bed beneath her was soft enough that she'd half feared sinking right through it. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the scent of coffee and bread drifted through the hall, and it all came back. Wyatt Langford. The ranch. The offer she hadn't dared to refuse. She rose, dressed in her faded calico dress, and peered out the window. From there, she could see the full sweep of the Langford spread, the endless fences, the grazing cattle, the shimmering horizon that looked like freedom and captivity all at once. Men were already out working. She spotted Wyatt among them, astride a dark bay stallion, his coat billowing like a banner as he rode across the pasture. He gave orders quietly, but his presence alone seemed to hold the ranch together. Even from a distance, Clara could see that everything here revolved around him. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of man he truly was. He'd shown her mercy when no one else would, but mercy could turn into power, and power could turn cruel. She'd learned that from life itself. When Boone, the ranch hand, brought her breakfast, he cleared his throat before setting the tray down. "Boss says you and the young'uns are to eat up and rest today. He'll see you after chores," Clara nodded, murmuring a polite thank you. The food, a thick slice of bread, warm butter, and milk, felt like a feast. She fed the babies first, their small mouths greedy, eyes fluttering in sleepy satisfaction. When they finished, she finally allowed herself to take a bite. It almost made her cry. Later, when Wyatt returned, the sun was high. He stopped at her doorway, hat in hand. "Room suits you?" he asked, his tone plain, unreadable. "Yes, sir. More than I deserve. You ain't got to keep calling me sir. Wyatt'll do." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." "Wyatt." The name felt strange in her mouth, like something too personal to hold. He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe. "You got a choice now, Clara May. You can stay here and help around the house, or I can pay you fair wages and find you a place in town when you're ready. Either way, you and them young'uns won't go hungry again." Her breath caught. "Why are you doing this for me?" Wyatt looked away toward the open fields beyond the window. "Because someone should have done the same for me once," he said softly. Then, almost too low to hear, he added, "Didn't." Something in his voice silenced every question she had. That afternoon, Wyatt took her on a ride around the property. He hitched a wagon, loaded the babies carefully, and drove slow so the horses wouldn't jostle them. The air smelled of sage and sun-warmed grass, and for the first time since her husband's death, Clara felt air in her lungs that didn't taste of fear. He pointed out the creek that bordered his land, the barn where she might help with mending or milking if she wished. Every word he spoke was steady, measured, not kind in the way of soft hearts, but kind in the way of men who mean what they say. At one point, as they crossed a field where the grass swayed like waves, she turned to him. "It's beautiful here," he nodded once. "Can be if you got reason to see it that way." She didn't answer. But when she looked down at her sleeping babies, full, safe, and warm, she realized she did. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Wyatt helped her down from the wagon. Their hands brushed briefly, rough meeting gentle. It wasn't a spark of romance yet. It was something quieter, respect, recognition. For the first time in a long, hard season, Clara May felt like she might have been carried somewhere other than just away from death. She had been carried, slowly, hesitantly, toward life again. The Langford Ranch was quiet most days, too quiet. The silence felt alive, as though it had learned to breathe inside those old walls. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of wind through the open windows seemed to carry a memory that wasn't hers. Clara May soon learned that Wyatt Langford's home was more than a house. It was a monument. Built by his own hands alongside the woman he'd once loved. Her touch lingered everywhere, in the lace curtains that framed the parlor windows, in the embroidered pillows stacked neatly on the sofa, even in the faint scent of lavender that rose when the sunlight hit the hallway just right. It was beautiful. But to Clara, it felt like stepping into another woman's life. She tried not to disturb things, moving softly, cleaning quietly, tending to her babies in the small corner room Wyatt had given her. She helped the cook in the kitchen, scrubbed the floors until her hands ached, and mended shirts for the ranch hands who were polite but distant. Boone, the old foreman, nodded to her now, his tone less wary. Still, she could sense the unspoken question in everyone's eyes. Who was she to him? Wyatt, for his part, kept his distance. He rose before dawn, worked until sundown, and ate most meals standing by the window or out on the porch. He rarely spoke more than a few words at a time, but when he did, they carried weight. "You're working too hard," he told her one morning as she wrung out a mop by the kitchen door. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Idle hands don't feed babies, Mr. Lang." She caught herself. "Wyatt," his mouth twitched. Almost a smile, almost not. "Ain't saying don't work, just don't forget to breathe once in a while." He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, the wind pushed it open, scattering dust across the floor. Clara bent to close it, and that's when she saw it, a photograph lying half-buried in the corner. She picked it up carefully. A woman stared back from the sepia tint, young, graceful, with eyes too much like Wyatt's to ignore. She was standing in front of the same porch Clara had just scrubbed clean, her smile soft but sure. The name scrawled on the back in faded ink read, Evelyn Langford, 1889. Clara froze. Wyatt turned back, and for a heartbeat, the air between them went still. His jaw tightened when he saw the photo in her hands. I didn't mean," she started. He stepped forward, gently took it from her, and placed it on the mantel beside the others. His hand lingered there for a moment before dropping to his side. "She was my wife," he said quietly. "Died in a fall. 3 years ago come winter." Clara lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." "She looks kind." She was. His voice roughened. "Kind and stubborn as a mule. Would have liked you, I think." That startled her. She wasn't used to being liked. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, her throat too tight for words. After that day, she noticed him watching her sometimes, when she rocked the babies on the porch or hung laundry to dry in the wind. Not with longing, but with something harder to name. Reflection, maybe. A man trying to remember what life had once felt like, and she, in turn, found herself thinking of him more often than she wanted to admit. One night, after the house had gone still, she rose to check on the twins. Moonlight spilled across the floor, silver and soft. She looked around the quiet room, the cradle, the little quilt she'd sewn, the worn Bible on the dresser, and realized that the ache in her chest wasn't just fear anymore. It was something else. Something she didn't dare name, because for all his silence, Wyatt Langford carried his own kind of ghost, and Clara May was beginning to feel it stirring in the halls, in his voice, in the space between their two hearts, trying to remember what warmth felt like. The days settled into a quiet rhythm after that, long, dusty hours that blurred together under the hum of ranch life. Clara May worked from dawn until the lamps burned low, her hands finding purpose in the chores that kept the ranch alive. She fed chickens, mended shirts, scrubbed the porch until it gleamed. But the ache of belonging, the need to earn her place, still gnawed at her heart. It was late summer when the storm rolled in. The sky had been clear that morning, a pale blue stretching forever. But by afternoon, thunder crouched low over the hills. Clara had just finished putting the twins down for their nap when she heard the shouting outside. "Easy now, boy, easy!" Boone's voice carried through the rain. She hurried to the porch and saw them. Boone, two ranch hands, and Wyatt, crowded around a horse that was thrashing in the mud, eyes wild with fear. Lightning split the sky, white and sharp. The horse reared, nearly breaking the rope tied around its neck. "That's Red," Boone yelled. "Took a bad step out by the creek. Legs swollen up something awful." Clara's heart clenched. She knew that look in an animal's eye, the kind of panic that came from pain and fear. Without thinking, she pulled her shawl over her head and ran into the rain. "Don't go near him," Boone called out, but she didn't stop. She dropped to her knees beside the horse, mud soaking through her dress. The animal trembled violently, its breath coming in ragged bursts. "Shh," she whispered, laying a hand on its neck. "Easy now. You're all right, fella." Her voice was low, calm, the same tone she used for her babies when they cried in the night. The horse's ears flicked toward her. Slowly, miraculously, it stopped fighting the rope. Wyatt stood a few paces away, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, watching her. He'd seen horses break bones, men break their necks, and women break under harder things than drought, but he'd never seen someone quiet a panicked animal with nothing but gentleness. Clara ran her hands carefully down the horse's leg, feeling for heat and swelling. "He's not broke," she said after a moment. "Just strained. Needs rest and cool water," Boone blinked. "How'd you—" "I grew up around horses," she said softly. "My pa used to say they listen more to hearts than hands." Wyatt stepped closer, crouching beside her. Rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead. "You sure about that leg?" She nodded. "Sure as I can be." For a long moment, they knelt there side by side in the storm, the only sound the soft patter of rain and the horse's heavy breathing. Then Wyatt reached out, taking the rope from Boone's grip. "All right, then. Let's get him to the barn." They worked together, steady and careful. Clara murmured to the horse with every step, and by the time they reached shelter, Red was calm enough to stand on his own. She fetched a bucket of cool water, tore strips from an old flour sack, and wrapped the leg with careful hands. When she finally straightened, soaked and shivering, Wyatt was still watching her. His eyes, usually hard as flint, had softened, their edge dulled by something unspoken. "You did good," he said quietly. "Real good." Clara blinked, startled by the warmth in his voice. "I just did what anyone would have done." He shook his head. "No, not anyone." For a heartbeat, their eyes held. Outside, the storm began to ease, the thunder rolling farther away. The barn smelled of hay and rain and something new between them, something neither dared to name. Then, just as she turned to leave, she caught it. A smile, small, fleeting, but real. Wyatt Langford's first in years. It hit her like sunlight through clouds, soft, unexpected, and warm enough to reach the part of her heart she'd thought had turned to stone. Later that night, when she tucked her babies into bed, she found herself smiling, too, not because she'd saved a horse, but because, for the first time since the drought began, someone had seen her, not as a burden, not as a beggar, but as someone who mattered, and in the silence of that vast house, A man who'd sworn he'd forgotten how to feel sat alone, thinking of the woman who'd brought life back into a place long haunted by ghosts. Autumn crept across the Langford ranch with a quiet menace, painting the fields golden and brittle, brushing the wind with the scent of distant rain and fallen leaves. For weeks, Clara May had begun to feel a fragile sense of safety. The babies laughed, their cheeks rosy from milk and sun. Wyatt had begun to allow her small freedoms, helping with the horses, teaching her to ride along the edges of the pastures, letting her cook at the kitchen hearth without oversight. Life had begun to hum again in the old house, but the shadows of her past never fully left, and shadows, she soon learned, had a way of finding you. It was Boone who first spotted him, a man riding a dark stallion, dust trailing behind, eyes fixed on the ranch gates. "Boss," Boone muttered, tension tightening his shoulders. "We got company." Wyatt's expression hardened instantly. The stranger was familiar, though Clara didn't yet recognize the danger in his posture. He looked every inch the predator, a debt collector from her past, someone who had whispered threats long before she'd set foot on the Langford land. Clara's stomach clenched. Memories flooded back, late nights hiding from the man's shadow, the small, desperate ways she'd tried to keep her children safe while scrambling for food, money, anything that might keep him away. "Who is he?" she whispered, clutching the babies closer. Wyatt didn't answer. He never rushed when danger came near. That was part of why he was a man people trusted. He mounted his horse, cloak billowing in the wind, and called Boone to follow. Clara stayed behind on the porch, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the dark figure approaching. The man's voice carried over the wind, sharp and demanding. "Langford! I know she's here. I want what's owed, or the girl and the children pay instead." Clara's breath caught. Her knees weakened. The words were the same threats she'd heard all her life. Only now the ground beneath her felt solid, with Wyatt between her and the danger. Wyatt's voice was steady, calm, cold as iron. "Touch her, and you answer to me. I ain't paying. You can turn around now and leave, or we see whose neck is longer." The man hesitated, shock flashing across his features. He had expected a frightened woman, maybe a weak ranch hand to intimidate. He had not expected Wyatt Langford, tall, unyielding, eyes hard as flint and set with unspoken consequences. Clara felt a flicker of hope, fragile as autumn sunlight. She watched Wyatt dismount, his boots sinking slightly in the dry grass. He stood in front of her, shielding the twins. Every inch of him said, "Don't cross this line." "You've got no business here," Wyatt said, low and deliberate. "I warned you. Leave." The collector sneered, but ultimately measured the man's resolve. It was clear that Wyatt was not bluffing. Slowly, reluctantly, he spurred his horse around and disappeared into the horizon dust, leaving Clara trembling but alive. When Wyatt turned back to her, she expected anger or a lecture, but instead he offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You're safe now," he said, his voice gentler. "We'll keep you that way. Ain't nobody threatening the Langford children under my watch." Clara's knees gave out, and she sank to the porch steps, clutching the babies to her chest. The adrenaline faded, leaving relief and a warmth that spread through her like sunlight breaking winter frost. Tears pricked her eyes, but they weren't tears of fear this time. They were tears of gratitude. Wyatt crouched beside her, brushing the wet hair from her forehead. "You see," he murmured, "ain't nothing that comes for you while I'm standing here." The babies stirred and cooed, and Clara smiled through her exhaustion. For the first time, she felt truly protected. Not just fed, not just sheltered, but guarded by a man who had promised her safety with every ounce of his strength. The threat had returned. Yes, but it had also revealed something Clara had begun to realize. Wyatt Langford was more than a protector. He was a force she could lean on. A man whose presence made even the darkest shadows of her past shrink in their wake. For the first time, she believed that her new life on the ranch was more than survival. It could be hope. The night came heavy and dark, carrying with it a storm that rattled the Langford ranch from horizon to horizon. Winds tore across the fields, bending the trees and whipping dust into the air like a living thing. Rain fell in sheets, turning the dry earth into slick mud, and the rumble of distant thunder rolled over the hills like an omen. Clara May woke to the first howl of the wind, her heart skipping at the cries of the babies. She rose from the small bed Wyatt had given her and hurried to the corner where they slept, checking each child carefully. Their small bodies were huddled together, breathing shallow but steady. She whispered softly to them, brushing damp hair from their foreheads. The storm was angry, relentless, but at least they were safe inside. Then in the distance a cry reached her ears that made her stomach twist with fear. One of the young horses, a colt barely a year old, had panicked in the storm. Its frightened neighs and the crash of its hooves against the stable walls carried across the rain-swept yard. Clara didn't hesitate. The instinct that had kept her alive through hunger and hardship surged forward. She pulled on her wet cloak, tucked the babies safely in a blanket she could sling over her shoulder, and ran toward the barn. Mud sucked at her boots. Rain plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't stop. Every step carried the memory of helplessness she'd felt during the drought. Every heartbeat a promise to herself. Not this time. Not my babies, not the animals, not this place. Wyatt was already there, trying to calm the young horse, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. When he saw her, his eyes widened with equal parts concern and admiration. "Clara, get back!" But she didn't. She couldn't. In the rain, she reached out, her hands steady despite the chaos, and grasped the colt's flailing legs. She murmured gentle reassurances, the same quiet tones that had coaxed her own babies through their cries. The animal's panic softened under her touch, muscle by trembling muscle, and slowly it began to stand. Wyatt watched her work, silent for the first time since she arrived at the ranch. He had seen courage in many forms, men fighting storms, cows breaking fences, cattle thieves with guns drawn. But this was different. The bravery of a woman who risked herself not for glory or reward, but because it was the right thing to do. Minutes later, soaked to the bone, Clara finally eased the colt into a stall and secured it. She collapsed against the hay bales, trembling from exertion and cold. Wyatt came to her side, throwing a dry coat over her shoulders, his hand brushing her arm in the motion. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in the dim, warm light of the barn. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. She shook her head. "I couldn't let him suffer. Just like I couldn't let my babies go hungry." Wyatt's gaze softened and he stepped closer. "You've got a heart, Clara, bigger than you know." He paused, looking out at the storm raging beyond the barn doors. "But courage alone won't always be enough. Sometimes you gotta make a choice. Protect those you love, even if it scares you." Her chest tightened. She realized in that instant that this was the moment, the choice she had to make. She could retreat into fear, continue surviving day by day, or she could embrace this life, this strange, unexpected safety with Wyatt and the children she carried in her arms. Clara May looked up at him, rain streaking her face, her hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes bright with resolve. "I choose," she said softly, "to fight for them, for us." Wyatt's lips quirked into the faintest smile, and for the first time she saw a warmth in him that matched her own. He nodded, gently brushing water from her hair. "Then we fight together." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the barn, something new had been born. Trust, courage, and the unspoken promise of a life forged through shared struggle. Clara felt it in her bones, the power of choice, the strength of love, and the undeniable truth that she was no longer just surviving. She was building a home. The night came heavy and dark, carrying with it a storm that rattled the Langford ranch from horizon to horizon. Winds tore across the fields, bending the trees and whipping dust into the air like a living thing. Rain fell in sheets, turning the dry earth into slick mud, and the rumble of distant thunder rolled over the hills like an omen. Clara May woke to the first howl of the wind. her heart skipping at the cries of the babies. She rose from the small bed Wyatt had given her and hurried to the corner where they slept, checking each child carefully. Their small bodies were huddled together, breathing shallow but steady. She whispered softly to them, brushing damp hair from their foreheads. The storm was angry, relentless, but at least they were safe inside. Then in the distance a cry reached her ears that made her stomach twist with fear. One of the young horses, a colt barely a year old, had panicked in the storm. Its frightened neighs and the crash of its hooves against the stable walls carried across the rain-swept yard. Clara didn't hesitate. The instinct that had kept her alive through hunger and hardship surged forward. She pulled on her wet cloak, tucked the babies safely in a blanket she could sling over her shoulder, and ran toward the barn. Mud sucked at her boots. Rain plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't stop. Every step carried the memory of helplessness she'd felt during the drought. Every heartbeat a promise to herself. Not this time. Not my babies, not the animals, not this place. Wyatt was already there, trying to calm the young horse, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. When he saw her, his eyes widened with equal parts concern and admiration. "Clara, get back!" But she didn't. She couldn't. In the rain, she reached out, her hands steady despite the chaos, and grasped the colt's flailing legs. She murmured gentle reassurances, the same quiet tones that had coaxed her own babies through their cries. The animal's panic softened under her touch, muscle by trembling muscle, and slowly it began to stand. Wyatt watched her work, silent for the first time since she arrived at the ranch. He had seen courage in many forms, men fighting storms, cows breaking fences, cattle thieves with guns drawn. But this was different. The bravery of a woman who risked herself not for glory or reward, but because it was the right thing to do. Minutes later, soaked to the bone, Clara finally eased the colt into a stall and secured it. She collapsed against the hay bales, trembling from exertion and cold. Wyatt came to her side, throwing a dry coat over her shoulders, his hand brushing her arm in the motion. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in the dim, warm light of the barn. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. She shook her head. "I couldn't let him suffer. Just like I couldn't let my babies go hungry." Wyatt's gaze softened and he stepped closer. "You've got a heart, Clara, bigger than you know." He paused, looking out at the storm raging beyond the barn doors. "But courage alone won't always be enough. Sometimes you gotta make a choice. Protect those you love, even if it scares you." Her chest tightened. She realized in that instant that this was the moment, the choice she had to make. She could retreat into fear, continue surviving day by day, or she could embrace this life, this strange, unexpected safety with Wyatt and the children she carried in her arms. Clara May looked up at him, rain streaking her face, her hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes bright with resolve. "I choose," she said softly, "to fight for them, for us." Wyatt's lips quirked into the faintest smile, and for the first time she saw a warmth in him that matched her own. He nodded, gently brushing water from her hair. "Then we fight together." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the barn, something new had been born. Trust, courage, and the unspoken promise of a life forged through shared struggle. Clara felt it in her bones, the power of choice, the strength of love, and the undeniable truth that she was no longer just surviving. She was building a home,